Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying those comfortable seats and have a bit of time with me today to talk about real-world DeFi and real use cases, which I think are, after the last couple of months, probably something we should all be thinking about, because we've seen that a lot of this hype, the unsustainable yield farming, is obviously all gone, and maybe like a lot of us today are thinking, okay, like now what's going to happen? Well, like let's think back at why we started building DeFi and like how actually the technology fundamentally is going to improve things, and how we can still have a bit of fun in all this. Just super quickly introduction about myself. I spent all my life, it feels like, working in tech. I straight out of high school kind of knew, okay, like Web 2, like startups, internet is going to be the most exciting technology that I could think of at the time. And so I started going into that very early on, spent about 10 years working in Web 2, and for the last 5 years actually went into Web 3. So in 2017, like I really understood, okay, like if you think of blockchains, what that could lead to, because sort of like thinking of how Ethereum can allow you actually not just to move money around, which is kind of something you do without thinking much about, but actually how it can allow you to program money, that's when it gets really exciting. And that kind of was my story of getting into crypto. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Centrifuge. A bit of a backstory, Centrifuge is almost as old as my history in crypto. We started very early on, before DeFi even existed, before like stablecoins really were a thing. It was 2017, and the ICOs were kind of like the hot thing that actually made a lot of DeFi kind of like necessary and proved out to be the first use cases for DeFi. So we always wanted to figure out, like, and this comes from like my history in fintech, we wanted to figure out how do we allow real businesses to use open technologies to have kind of like a bit of a chance against like these giant tech companies that kind of like just mostly use their own position of power to get the most revenue, get the biggest platform, like increase their moat, right? And so we said, okay, well, actually, if you have an open Ethereum or like an open blockchain and everyone can work together, that actually allows you to do stuff that you maybe otherwise couldn't. And that was very early. But so then, like, kind of like I started doing more and more about finance. Like, I knew nothing about finance before I got into DeFi. Like, I thought it was the most boring thing. People in suits would do it that really didn't want to work and kind of like were mostly unnecessary. I think for a lot of finance, this is actually, I would say, still very much true. But obviously, we all like really depend on finance. Like, finance is what allows us to do stuff in this world. If you have an idea, you want to go out and build something, you're not going to be able to just take this idea. You need actually money to hire a team. You need money to buy the goods that you want to sell. You need money to educate yourself, to get surgery, to buy a house, right? It's all like money is maybe the necessary evil, maybe just like the fuel that we can use to actually like impact the world. And so if you think of like this power, well, you can think of how do you actually make sure that everyone has access to it. And that's why I think access to finance is actually such an important like part of how we live together. Like, if you don't have access to finance, you don't have access to building your own company, buying a house, building a house, like having a good education, right? All this stuff. So you're at a huge disadvantage. And I think like our financial system today is very bad at actually giving everyone access to finance. So like, if you think of finance today, unfortunately what happens is you have like a borrower that wants to borrow money. They pay, I don't know, 10% interest a year. And then there's probably like about 10 different companies and people that are kind of like taking some of that interest. And then like, if I put money on my bank account, like I hardly see any of that, those 10% of where my money was lent out to end up actually on my savings account, right? Over the last couple of 100 years, we built a financial system that became bigger and bigger. It's actually now estimated to be around 20% of our GDP. So imagine like I spend $1, about 20% goes to banks, credit funds, whatnot, right? And hasn't really been like seen this efficiency gains that everything else in tech has seen, and with the advance of the internet. And so I think in a way, DeFi is the like email of what the letter is that the financial system is today, right? And so kind of like going to what we want to build with DeFi, right? Like we're building an infrastructure that doesn't rely on all these middlemen, or at least kind of like these intermediaries that are mostly here today to justify their own fees. And we're doing that in a way that anyone can actually build it. And if there's arbitrage, you can kind of come and use that, exploit it. You can try to build a better alternative that's cheaper. And you can compose on each other and kind of like do this together, right? And so so how does this actually affect the real world, right? Like if we see people doing crazy stuff in DeFi today with their crypto utility tokens, governance tokens, DOT, any like KSM, like ETH, right? Like all of the parachain tokens are all like part of this DeFi ecosystem. And it's where we started because, well, there was no financial system for these assets. But in today's financial system, there are actually a lot of assets, a lot of users that are like equally lacking in a fair or good user experience. So I just want to like highlight two of the things and then talk about what we're doing at Centrifuge and how we're kind of like trying to solve a real problem, and how I believe that's like one of the major sort of places where we can grow into. And I mean Polkadot, the ecosystem, crypto in general, like where we can show that DeFi actually is a place for like building good financial products. I made this. I showed how like a small business would maybe pay 10, 15, 20% interest a year. They want to borrow $100,000 to buy a new piece of equipment to manufacture more efficiently. They're going to a bank. They're trying to get a loan. At a bank, their priority number 1 million, because like there's probably 100,000 other people that want an equally small loan. It doesn't make a difference to their bottom line. Google on the other side, and like this is maybe a bit outdated now with inflation, but like last year they were borrowing at basically zero, right? So today this is only getting worse, right? Like the interest rates for everyone are going up, for Google as well, but for small businesses even more. But Google does like borrow money at a cost of capital that's like less than a tenth. So what does that mean actually? Like if you think of it, Google is able to undercut their competition, the small businesses, everyone that doesn't have access to this cheap liquidity, because if they're spending $1 billion developing a phone and they're only paying like a couple of million in interest a year, and someone else is paying 10% interest in a year, so $100 million a year in interest, right? Like that cost has to be passed on to someone, and that's like how like these large companies with a finance department of a couple of dozen people or hundreds of people have actually this huge advantage. And that's why I kind of like talk about the fuel, and as we think of DeFi, right, like we can build products that actually like try to get rid of this inherent advantage that large companies have. Another like completely astounding number that I always think of is like Western Union, the company, all they do is they send money from A to B. They have like revenue of $5 billion a year. For what exactly? Something that really is not much more than an email in technical terms, right? Like sending tokens around, ridiculously easy. Yet, like $5 billion is waiting to get disrupted. And those $5 million, like, it's not the Googles, it's not us here in overbanked Europe that are paying that. It's actually like someone trying to send money from the UK to Costa Rica, or from paying a farmer for coffee in Ecuador, right? Like that's kind of like where this money is coming from, and that's you kind of like then think of it, oh, like why are we paying that much, when really it should be free or nearly free. So DeFi can be this new financial system because it's built based on technology that is kind of pushing for transparency, pushing for removal of intermediaries that are not necessary, for kind of like allowing competition to come up and provide better alternatives, and like for your DEX aggregator, just use the cheapest exchange possible, right? For your like for many different layer 2s to like innovate and compete on like the cheapest payments network, so that you can actually just pay money wherever it is cheapest, however it's easiest. And I think at the very core, right, these ideas of what crypto was in 2017, the idea of Ethereum, of like people building applications and working together, right? Like this idea of DeFi money Legos coming together and working together on this is actually kind of like what makes us competitive with finance today. So this is openness, the transparency, and the trustlessness, right? Because this means you can work together without relying on the large bank that is the trusted intermediary that can allow many different borrowers to match up with many different lenders. So what do we do in all this? Centrifuge is bringing real-world assets on chain because, as I've talked about all these different examples, well, like we have our crypto tokens that we want to use DeFi with, but the majority of the world does not have those tokens, and they actually also need access to finance. So what they need is actually they need a way for their own assets to come into DeFi and for them to be able to build, or to borrow with the assets that they have, meaning their real estate, their future revenue as a small business, their like goods that are being shipped around the world, consumer loans, right? And so if we want to make DeFi useful for these users, well, let's start with like actually getting their assets on chain, and that's what we're doing at Centrifuge. Like most simply explained, we're kind of like taking these off-chain assets that are usually very hard to price, they're hard to understand. We put them into pools, so you can, for example, have a pool of real estate loans, or you can have a pool of trade finance loans against many different shippers around the world, and then like allow those tokens to be made composable in DeFi, to be used as collateral in stable coins, to be used for leverage in an Aave market, for example, and earn yield on them, or for DeFi lenders to invest in them and kind of like diversify the risk, right? We're building all this in Polkadot. I mentioned our history was quite old. So we started in 2017, kind of looking at this stuff and thinking, and then DeFi started to become a thing. And we said, okay, like actually if we want to build an ecosystem of service providers, people that work together on bringing these assets on chain, like how do we do it best? And we kind of like made this bet on Polkadot very early on to say, okay, well, like it gives us the power of our own chain. It gives us the ability to have built-in very strong governance, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important features or kind of like components of a good, agile, fast-moving, but also scalable and secure DeFi protocol. And we can do this in a scalable way, because if you look at these real-world assets, there's usually a lot of data with it. There's like a lot of very specialized calculations we do, and so we can do that much more efficiently if you actually build our own runtime, right? And so we actually launched our own proof-of-stake chain that was right after Kusama launch, about a year before Polkadot went live, and then or half a year before Polkadot went live, sorry. And then like kind of around that time, like we moved over to, around a year later, we moved over to run Parachain. So in April this year, we went live as a Parachain. So migrated kind of like our entire chain and have now been working on expanding that. So what is it? So maybe if you think of these use cases, these assets, right? Today, most of DeFi TVL is crypto native, and I don't need to mention more than the word Terra for like a lot of us, right, to think back at where all this TVL was coming from, how it was incentivized, like what people were doing with it. The reality is a lot of it was actually just incentivized by like VCs, retail, whatever, buying kind of like these yield incentives, hoping that the price goes up. Now, of course, that's not really sustainable. So, well, I can tell you there's like trillions in assets out there in the real world that are paying sustainable yields so you can safely farm or just invest in. And they actually are interested in having an alternative to banks, right? And so kind of like this is the opportunity for us to like as like a lot of this hot air or maybe the optimism of countless DeFi lenders has gone away a bit. We can actually say, okay, like let's build this technology for what we wanted to build it in the first place, to actually solve these people's problem and bring trillions of dollars into this industry. So where we are today, We have about 10 pools live. So there's real estate, trade finance, emerging market consumer loans. We have a pool of gig economy workers like Uber drivers, delivery drivers, that today have a very hard time to get access to capital because they're self-employed a lot of times, right? And no bank is going to look at your Uber app and say, oh yeah, like you have a good history of driving and you're going to be around and make more money next month and we're going to give you a credit, right? So any kind of like these assets, we have about 10 of those pools. You have 85 million in TVL, actually a little bit more now, close to 90. What does it mean, 90 million TVL? It means we've taken 90 million USD stablecoins, mostly DAI, and businesses that are using our products are taking those into fiat and giving it to thousands of borrowers. And most of these borrowers actually don't even know that they're being financed by a maker. Or that there is an Aave money market that people are providing liquidity into that their money is coming from, right? They're just buying a house. And that's how it should be. So we have about, we have two big DeFi protocols that we work with today. Coming from our history in Ethereum, we've been working for a very long time with Maker. I think we're the first real-world asset live there and have about 30 million in DAI outstanding that's actually minted, backing sort of DAI backed by real-world assets, which is, I think, pretty cool to think of like a stable coin that actually finances these loans. We also work with different fintechs, basically, that actually originate these loans, create pools on Centrifuge and bring these assets in. And then we have, like, at the moment, I think 209 active liquidity providers. So those are just like high net worth individuals, retail investors that are kind of like providing some of their own capital to invest in these pools. All these stats are on Ethereum today. Actually, we are proposing the runtime upgrade on Altair, which is our Kusama parachain testnet, to actually implement a lot of the tech that I just talked about on Kusama in our parachain, with a plan to roll that out in the next 2 to 3 months on Centrifuge, which will then actually, as we're all here to talk about Polkadot, mean that we're going to move more and more of this TVL into our parachain and start kind of like working with the Akalas, with the Moonbeam, right? Anyone here, right? That is like kind of like looking for real-world assets as like a kind of a diverse, scalable asset class that they can add to their DeFi protocols. So maybe I'm going to skip for this. So talking a bit about Polkadot. Right, like why do we want to work actually in this? What does it mean if we bring these real assets to Polkadot? We can do a lot of cool stuff with XCM. That's going to be very hard if you think of like DeFi today, and I'm very excited about. Like in the end, right? Like we need scalability because we all know like financial system today has a throughput that's like hundreds of thousands of times bigger than even the fastest blockchain today. So the scalability that you get by just like running your own chain and sort of having the freedom to do whatever you want in there is extremely useful. But we also know that like DeFi actually only really was successful because people were able to do whatever they wanted and like build their own smart contracts that interacted with each other, right? And you had DeFi summer and people doing crazy farms. You had Yearn build a kind of like a, I don't even know what I would explain it, compare it to, like maybe an on-chain investment bank or like capital manager. You had people build leverage protocols that would take Uniswap LP positions and lever them to like optimize yield, right? All these kind of things, they were possible because of DeFi being open and programmable, which if you were to try to build this financial product in the real world, the first thing you'd do, you'd spend 6 months with the compliance department at a bank trying to convince them that what you're doing is legal. Then you're trying to convince them that what you're doing is safe. And then that's going to make them a lot of money, right? And then you've spent probably like a year talking to them without even building anything. Well, in DeFi, like you don't have to do that because the smart contract lets you do something. We know it's safe. We know how it works. Like you can work together. So how does that work in Polkadot? Obviously with XCM, right? So instead of having to all be on this one crowded network that is Ethereum today, and having to like move liquidity around from an L1 to an L2 and back. We can actually have our chains talk to each other. Centrifuge is focusing on the tokenization, bringing these real-world assets in, working with borrowers, and then take those assets and bridge them into a money market, or bridge them into an exchange, right? So I think also for us, it's especially important, if you remember kind of like these flash crashes that crypto has today and has had in the last years, well, a lot of it is coming from the fact that the only asset class we have today is very, very strongly correlated, right? So we can't build a stable financial system if when Bitcoin moves 50%, everything also moves 50%. There's no way to hedge that risk, right? If everything is correlated, you're just going to do whatever the market does. Now, it's not entirely like that, and it's getting a little bit uncorrelated already, but like we can't build a financial system just with tech stock, right? So we need to build actually a financial system that has everything from farmland to treasuries to the most speculative early stage tech equity companies or crypto projects. And so what we're bringing is stable debt, right? And that can be hugely valuable for other projects that require kind of like uncorrelated assets, uncorrelated yield to kind of like stabilize their marketplace. And like last thing, right? Like if we think of parachains, and this is something Brainshare mentioned in his talk about composable, like you can do stuff like split orders across different dexes, and you can do that without having to think of 100 different security trade-offs between 5 permutations of bridges, different deposits, withdrawal periods, and so on, right? So you get kind of like that scalability and still really, really attractive usability. For us, actually, what we're doing on the like cross-chain side is obviously XCM is like one big component, but I actually believe we need to build a layer on top of it, which is kind of like the user interface. If you think of a bridge can pass messages around, but people actually just want to interact with an app. And so what connectors is, it's kind of like an abstraction layer for us that allows really like interacting with any other parachain, interacting with other EVM chains to allow users to like create a deposit, provide liquidity into one of our pool no matter where they are. I think that's extremely helpful when you go out and like you're on Moonbeam today, you have $100,000 that you want to invest in real estate. Like you don't want to be going to Centrifuge, bridge your tokens, buy a new token, configure your new wallet, move it over, right? Like, but you do want to look at the Centrifuge user interface and just say, oh, like I like this pool, I want to invest in it from Moonbeam. What Connectors actually does, and we've announced this a few weeks ago, and are kind of like now developing that together with a lot of different projects. It allows us to kind of like provide this native user interface no matter what chain you're on. And I think that's something I'm very excited about. If you want to go check it out, I'd encourage you to go have a look. Check out our blog. I would say this is a good starting point. If you go there, read about connectors, reach out to me. I'd love to hear kind of like the cool stuff that you think of building, of how you want to use real-world assets in your project. So kind of like my last slide, a bit of a call out to motivate everybody and talk a bit about the market we're in today and the kind of like the story that DeFi has been on, right? Like kind of feels like we're all trying to figure out where we are. Well, like really just think back at the why we started to do it in the beginning. And for us, the why we're doing what we're doing is we want to create a world where everyone has access to finance. And I think that's a better world for everybody. And it's a world where like blockchain will actually proliferate, build better products, and we can actually create a much fairer financial system. And I hope that a lot of you guys will join us in this, building kind of like these sustainable products that have really a positive impact on everybody. So yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you very much. Are you okay to take 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, any questions? at the bottom.
Thanks, Lucas. You've mentioned some of the respective benefits and shortcomings of scaling using cross-chain communication versus a layer 2, layer 1 that's happening on other networks, especially on Ethereum. Do you see these as two competing philosophies moving forward, two complementary philosophies? And what's your favorite approach in this regard?
I think in the end, everything will look like a crab. Is something, I don't know who it was. I think it was a guy at Nomad that said that. Yeah, Pranay. We were talking about like what bridges look like and what chains look like. And well, the crab was evolved into something like a crab, I think around 6 times, from 6 different places in the world, like 6 different species. And in the end, it's like the crab is just like a very resistant creature. And I think in the same way, like blockchains, we're at a point today where excuse me, a lot of the stuff we're still trying to figure out, but I already see like a lot of parallels between ETH2 and Polkadot, between Cosmos building shared security now, which was something they like firmly didn't believe in a few years ago. And so ultimately, like, I believe like if you think of like a scalable blockchain, we'll have to have sharding. With sharding will come some sort of like cross-shard communication. And you will want to have strong shared consensus, and you'll want to rely on like bridges that have like fully light client verifying like proofs, right? So like essentially trustless bridges. I think we're all kind of like trying to do different variations of that, and we're figuring that out. I believe XCM is a pretty good start. I believe like Polkadot had a lot of these sort of early technical bets right, and we're going to see a lot of that coming. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. From a practical standpoint, how can I tokenize my real-world assets using the Centrifuge platform? Like if I have a house or a car, how can I tokenize it? And from a legal standpoint, if somebody defaults on the loan, how is he going to be liquidated?
So I believe in a world where in the future we will have people coming with their houses and directly using the blockchain to get a loan. But we all know how hard crypto is. It's barely possible to use it as a software engineer. So we obviously still have a very long way to go, right? So the users that use Centrifuge today are actually not individuals that borrow directly, but it's like, we call them issuers. They're fintechs that are in the business of originating loans, and they're using Centrifuge as a source of liquidity, because that way we can actually get the scale. These issuers are abstracting away the hard like crypto stuff, right? Like turning it into fiat, because most of the time, like all of us in here maybe are comfortable getting stable coins when we borrow money, but most people out there on the street would not, right? So those issuers are actually creating these pools, saying, I want to bring real estate on the East Coast in the US loans between $100,000 and $1 million with like this kind of borrower profile. They'll say, okay, we'll create this pool. We expect to have maybe 100 loans in there by the end of the year. We're going to start offering that, and so that's the process they go through, and then like other kind of investors on the platform can look at those and say, yeah, actually I like this one or I like that one, and that's kind of how it works today. The second question on the legal, we spent almost as much time working on our legal tech as we work on our smart contracts. Not quite, but there is quite a bit of kind of like legal like structuring that we do we basically create like a legal entity for each pool, where if you actually buy those tokens, you get legal rights against the assets in this entity. So that's the simplest description I can give. All of this is actually open source. You can look at it in our documentation, where you can like see the kind of like investment agreements, the agreements the borrowers sign that make sure that like in the 99.9 whatever 99% of cases where like the loan gets repaid as expected. It's the chain that does this, that calculates the interest payments and all that. And if this transaction was not to occur, then there's a set of legal contracts that enforce that as a borrower, like you as a lender to this pool, can force the borrower to actually repay those smart contracts. And you can take them to bankruptcy court and make sure that that gets paid back. And so there's this kind of like the work we're doing. So in the end, it's very similar to like when you don't pay your bank, right? Like a collection agency will come and will make sure that you pay. Yeah, thank you.